Police in the Netherlands fired shots at farmers in their tractors last week. That's a sentence I never expected to hear myself say out loud. The incident happened during protests by thousands of Dutch farmers, angry at government plans to cut their use of fertilisers and reduce their cattle herds in the name of saving the environment. There have been clashes with police, and farmers have used their tractors to block roads, sprayed government buildings with manure and blocked access to buildings. Meanwhile, supermarkets lie severely depleted of food. Unrest has spread across Europe to Germany, Italy and Poland. Dutch Prime Minister Mark Rutte said of his proposals to cut emissions, quote, "The honest message is that not all farmers will continue in business. Those that do will have to farm differently." I'm joined now by Dutch politician Simone Kerseboom and Jeroen van Manen from the Dutch Dairy Farmers Association. Good evening to you both, and thank you for taking the time. Simone, if I may, this is a cause of unrest. This unrest has been simmering for longer than a few weeks, has it not?
Yeah, absolutely, Neil. I mean, these plans that the government has now announced have been playing for many years already, but now they just have made it concrete. And I mean, they have announced that they want to reduce nitrogen emissions in the Netherlands by about 70%. That means that up to 50% of private farms in the Netherlands could be expropriated by the state. And of course, the excuse is an invented nitrogen crisis. Just in order to comply with rules and standards set by the European Union for nature preservations. And farmers have been identified as a major threat to these fake nature preservation goals. And so these farmers need to go, according to the Dutch government. But, can you imagine, Neil, if your life's work, the work of generations of your family to provide food for your country and for the rest of the world, suddenly being declared to be a public enemy and you're being forced off your land? And, so the farmers quite rightfully have started these demonstrations against this government policy. And they're not taking this lying down. And these protests have seen distribution centers being blocked, roads being blocked, demonstrations in cities across the Netherlands and outside of Parliament and other municipal offices. And we absolutely stand behind our farmers in this existential battle that is taking place here.
Now, you've said it's been this concern about nitrates and fertiliser and the rest is not new. It seems incomprehensible in a time of global food insecurity that any government would choose now to bring about such a crisis by cracking down on its farmers and the Dutch farmers of all farmers who produce so much of the food upon which the wider world depends. Where is the sanity in that?
Now, I think you're asking one of the most essential questions that is taking place here. How can this happen, especially in this time in the world? And, well, my party looks at it a certain way, and we're seeing this just as part of facilitating, the globalist agenda, the Great Reset, Agenda 2030. The farmers' land is needed to facilitate a mass migration. Farmers are, of course, major land owners in the Netherlands. So, of course, if land is needed, the Netherlands is a tiny, tiny country. And if you want to bring more people in, you're going to need land to build houses. And then, of course, there's also the transnational agenda. I think that is very important, an important part of that Great Reset. And that is to destroy the self-reliance and sovereignty through reliance on international supply chains. And they want to make us more dependent on international supply chains. They want to weaken Dutch sovereignty and autonomy. And they want to turn us into one large city. And I think that's the agenda. One large city without its own means of production, without autonomy, without sovereignty, without its own food production. And that is to make people more dependent on international leaders, the globalists. And then I think the third most important point, and perhaps on a more philosophical level, is that it's about uprooting people. Farmers present a link to the land, but it's about more than simply facilitating mass migration and transnational agenda, because farmers also represent a deep historical and physical connection to the land. And in the Netherlands especially, our farms and our agricultural sector are also a symbol of our national identity. So getting rid of farmers is also about uprooting people and severing their connection with the land. Farmers, by their very being, thus present a direct threat to the globalist, transnational, and post-identitarian goals. So the real point is the Great Reset. So things like mass immigration, transnational governance, and that is why they want people to lose their connection to the land and become global citizens without roots.
I mentioned the unrest is spreading. The farmers in Germany, in Italy, Poland, elsewhere. I don't suppose they're all angry about precisely the same issues as the Dutch farmers. But what do you make of the way in which the dissatisfaction, the anger of the people who produce the food we eat is spreading in the way that it is?
Well, I think, once again, this is twofold. We already saw similar legislation being passed, pushed in the rest of the world during COVID. Different countries were implementing the same policies. And we're seeing this attack on farms taking place now. And of course, as I already mentioned, of course, they want to make us completely dependent for our food on the international supply chains. But I think my party leader has also mentioned this already, and he says that the problem with politicians and members of parliament, not only in the Netherlands, but in the Western world, is that they've become micromanagers. So, in the Netherlands, we get presented with a nitrogen crisis. That is then the stick with which they want to beat the farmers. It is simply just an excuse to facilitate a larger agenda. But all those politicians are simply focusing on that nitrogen crisis. They're focusing on how can we reduce nitrogen emissions by taking away farms. They're debating about the price to give farmers to take away their land. But they're not taking a step back and looking at how all these smaller issues that are taking place, like the COVID policies, like climate hysteria, like this invented nitrogen crisis that we have now, what that actually means for our economy in the long run. What does that mean for food production in the long run? What does that mean for our sovereignty and our autonomy in the long run? And like I said, that's not just happening in the Netherlands, that is happening everywhere in the world. And that is why this is a much larger fight than just taking place here. And this is a fight that we are facing together. This is part of Agenda 2030. We've got 8 more years to fight this agenda, and that needs to be globally. We can't just do this in the Netherlands. We can't do this in Italy. We need to go to Canada. We need to go to Australia. We need to go to the UK. This is a fight. Like I said, this is an existential fight, and we need to stay strong together and keep on fighting that agenda so that we can at least ensure that our nation stays sovereign and that our food production remains in the hands of farmers.
Strong words, moving words. Simone Kerseboom, Jeroen van Manen, thank you so much for your time. I wish I had more time with you, but I have to get on with the evening here. But thank you so much. Thank you so much for the time that you've been able to give us this evening.
Thank you, Neil.
Jacob,
it was a pleasure to be here.
If you like this video, please subscribe to our channel for regular updates or go to forumfordemocracy.com for more content.